The end is coming. It draweth nigh. The eschatological moment is coming. Page, this is Unit 16, page 143. Whoever asked the question about, the congregation as a learning community, who was it? Are some of you still here? Whoever it was, or have they left? Yeah, you did. Good. See, I told you, it's here. My question. So, what I really wonder about is, what do any of you think if that was the question about your congregation? Right? My congregation is a learning community. Yes, no, maybe, sort of, or that's such a confusing thing I don't even know. My question here, look at what I say here, what would be some implications of defining your congregation as a learning community? We're a community learning to follow Jesus, for instance. Well, let me just say a couple of things about that. I think it would be fairly radical. Partially because, for me, and maybe this is not so applicable here, I don't know. I'm a visitor in your wonderful country and have received your wonderful hospitality. I don't know this culture particularly well. I'm a guest. But in my own culture, oh my goodness, this is a problem. Because there's primarily a functional understanding of church, or a sort of consumer product commercial kind of relationship about it. In other words, you go there to consume certain kinds of goods and services. The church is a sort of agency that offers you goods and services to consume, and you find what you like, you take and leave what you like, and it's basically a kind of consumerist trap in a way that we're mimicking the world about. So people, follow their favorites here and there. They're very much motivated by, various kinds of pleasure factors. That doesn't sound like a learning community. It sounds like a consumerist kind of community. I think that's a big problem. There's also, in my context, the entertainment paradigm, which is pretty powerful, right? We like entertainment. We like slick, and we like packaged. How does any of that have to do anything with discipleship is what I want to know. So, I think if we actually take really seriously, are we a community that is in the learning business? It would change all of those paradigms, because it means that we're in the growth and transformation business. And if you're a part of this community, be prepared to be involved in a growth and transformation process. We're not here for entertainment. We're not here to offer you goods and services. We're here to do something really very, very different than that. We're a community. So the learning community's got two pieces of that. The community bit. Boy, in my part of the world, that's a struggle. It's a huge struggle, because in my part of the world, we're so formed by an individualistic culture. We want to take and leave what we want to take and leave, come and go when we want, according to our agendas. We opt into community as we pretty much feel like it. The community doesn't really make very many claims upon me. I'm giving this great gift of some time and attention to some other group of people, kind of when I feel like it. Now, that's a fairly blistering critique, but I think it's sort of where we are in the North American church with our individualism. Right? It's very, very bad. And it's not what the church really looks like in biblical terms. Right? It looks like a real community of people who are an extended family of God. Right? Who are called to sacrifice for one another, who belong to one another's lives, and who don't opt in and out when you feel like it, but who belong to one another fundamentally. Right? That's what's true about us. Well, let's think about the community. Let's think about the learning community. If that's what community is, what would it mean if you put learning at the center of the definition? Well, it gets back to core definition of discipleship. To be a disciple is to be a learner. That's where the very Greek word comes from. That's the derivation. Jesus assumes that people are going to be lifelong learners as they are followers of his. And the task of the church is to make other disciples who will also be lifelong followers. That's Matthew 28. Making disciples, teaching them to obey all the things that I've commanded you. Have you noticed that the Great Commission, as we call it, and put it on the walls, and have mission conferences about it, and so on, has teaching at the heart of the definition of the mission of the church? It's quite startling, actually. Do we take that seriously? Mission is at the heart of Jesus' definition of the mission of the church. Seems to me we should be very serious about how teaching and learning happen in the life of the church. We should be very serious about these questions of what kind of growth and progress and transformation are people making in their lives of faith, in their lives of living out a deep and integrated faith in every area of life, not having a Sunday faith of showing up when they feel like it and going off on Monday to conform to the world's ways. Right? So a learning community, a community of learners, learners to follow Jesus, serious about that as their identity. A lot of this goes back to questions of identity. Right? Who are we? Are we people that the world tells us we are, consumers and producers, part of a capitalist order, right? And that's who we really are, and then we opt in that consumerist mode into church when we kind of feel like it? Or are we fundamentally, identity-wise, disciples? Do we belong to Christ, and do we belong to the body of Christ, and that's the truest truth about us, and we live everything else out of that core, including the life that we live when we go to work on Monday. It's not that you don't go to work on Monday. It's that going to work on Monday is defined by what you've done on Sunday, if you're going to put it that way, rather than the other way around. Your identity in relationship to Christ and His people forms how all of life is lived, right? And what the church as a learning community needs to be is learning to understand and live into what that means. To first and foremost, live in and for Christ as a part of His people in every area of life. That's the goal. Well, is that what our community life is really all about? Are we growing together? Can we hold one another accountable to that as our goal and aspiration? Can we gear our learning together towards those ends? What kind of spiritual formation do we need if that's the kind of people we need to be? What kind of study do we need to do? Right? One of the great things about the inheritance of the Jewish tradition is that it's always elevated the importance of study. I'm very much aware that we and our part of the world have a certain kind of, my part of the world, laziness about this. It's like, loving God with heart, mind, soul, and strength includes heart, mind, soul, and strength. Let's not be lazy. Right? Strength means your energy and your embodied reality. Your mind means your thinking. Christ wants all of that, not just some of it. So how do we create the conditions as a community for that kind of formation in faith for the sake of following after Jesus that really makes a difference? How can you have a learning environment, a learning community where those things are operational? Nobody is going to be perfect, of course. I don't expect anyone to be perfect. The point is being on a journey. The point is having a destination. The point is accompanying with one another into that kind of life of faith. Okay? What are some of the ways that you do that? Well, some of this gets down to some things, but that are in these notes in Unit 16 and 17. But it comes back in a lot of ways to the same sort of themes that I have had from the beginning, which is people who are challenged at that level need a lot of support. My theology here is if you challenge people very deeply to a very high bar of discipleship the way that I'm describing it, they need a lot of support to do that, right? People aren't going to do it on their own, but I think back to the point about Bain and teachers, what do great teachers expect? More, right? What should the church expect? More. Right? More seriousness, right, about this as a task. Theological bracket. Not in our own strength, by the grace and mercy of God, according to His provision, in the power of the Spirit. I can give you a whole theology about that. I'm not just saying this is pull yourself up by the bootstraps Christianity, by the way. That's not it. I taught a whole other class some of you are in that was attacking that model relentlessly and putting an alternative together. So I'm saying seriousness about discipleship doesn't mean just grit your teeth and work harder. No, it means through the grace and mercy of God, in the power of the Spirit, in His community, with His people, we together will belong to Him, we will live for Him, we will be His witnesses, and these brothers and sisters are helping me on that journey. That's who I really am. Right? And this is what we as a community are really about. This is what we're learning to do. And we're not going to be perfect with it, but we're going to say that's what we're about. That sort of life is pleasing to God. That sort of life is a witness of the church to the watching world. Right? How do you create the institutional context with what goes on in individual relationships, in mentoring and discipling relationships, in small groups, in Bible study, in preaching, in all the other means of formation, in the gathered congregational worship life of the church? How do you gear it all around that kind of quest to know and love and honor God and be His people in His world with that kind of discipleship?